Recently, we did an unboxing of the Fluval FX2, and today we're going to compare the FX2 to the FX6, and also kind of by proxy, the FX4. So, let's dive into it. Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and today we're going to be taking a look at an FX2 and one of my FX6s. And the reason we're doing this is pretty simple. We need to compare sizes of these canisters, some of their dimensions, how much media they hold, and a couple of key features that are different between the FX4 and FX6 versus our FX2, and why you would select an FX2 versus, say, big boy over here. So let's get a couple things out of the way. First and foremost, this is a sponsored video. Fluval provided me with this FX2. I'm not being paid for the video, but I do get to keep the filter. So we need to get that kind of out of the way. Just keep that in mind. They don't get to see this ahead of time. They don't get to put any feedback. It's all my honest opinions, but they did provide this product. I bought this FX6 with my own hard-earned dollars. I've bought a number of them over the years. I don't have an FX4, but the FX6 is a reasonable competitor, and we'll call out some of those differences. So first things first, other than like obvious height, let's use basically just the lids to give you a size comparison to start. So to give you kind of a size comparison of our bucket versus bucket, the hard part is these intake tubes. Will that fit in there? No. But you can kind of see just raw difference, and the actual dimensions per Fluval. I'm going to set the lids over here because we're going to look at their trays. Are pretty simple. So let's compare the major difference here. An FX6 versus an FX4, first of all. They are the same diameter, so distance across, circumference around. The only difference is the FX6 is a little taller because it has a third media tray inside. The FX2 only has two media trays, like the FX4, but is more narrow in its diameter and circumference. Let's talk dimensions now that I've got them up. And forgive me, I'll have to reference my phone just to make sure I get it right. But the FX2, side to side here, is 13.4 inches. And it is 16.5 inches tall. The FX4 is also 16.5 inches tall. And I'm pretty confident that does not include the stop valves. I'll get a measurement with the stop valves and have that in text down below. Whereas the FX4, left to right, is the same as the FX6, which is 15.5 or 15.75 inches. So you're looking at 2.3 inches, roughly speaking, more across on the FX6 and FX4 than the FX2. This is part of their design to make this more compact and fit into cabinetry. And then, of course, big boy here, our FX6 is 15.75 inches, again, just like the FX4, but is 20.8 inches tall, which is just the difference of that extra media tray. As for the pumps, let's talk about the pumps. The FX2 has a 475 US gallon per hour pump over here. The FX4 uses a 700 US gallon per hour pump, and FX6, the big bad boy, is 925 US gallons per hour. So basically, the main differences between our FX4 and FX6 is FX4 has two trays and is a little shorter, and has a slightly weaker pump than the FX6. So with that being said, we can kind of use some of the FX6 parts to give us comparisons on the FX2. Let's look at the other major feature that the FX2 does not have that both the FX4 and FX6 has. If we are to look at our unit down here by the pump, you have this lovely drain valve, right? We know this. We've talked about the Sun, how the Sun one, in my experience, the HW5000, doesn't sit on there very well. This is nice and locked in place with a rubber stop that gets hooked in there with a screw seal. FX4 and FX6 both have that lovely drain valve. It's fantastic. Notice something missing? We do not have that same drain valve on the FX2. Just in case you're like, man, maybe it's hidden somewhere, Bentley. So the other thing we lose in the FX2 is that drain valve, which I would argue is kind of a major downside and might make you ask, well, why would you want an FX2 compared to a Fluval 407? If you really want a full comparison between those two filters, let me know in the comments down below. I am fully willing to use the PetSmart trick and go acquire a 407 to do a comparison. I don't own a 407 currently. I have like some 405s and I think about like a 306, but not a 407. So if you do want to see that comparison, put in the comments below. We'll do an extra comparison comparing FX2 to 407 and talk about that. So in the case of the FX2 versus big boy FX6 or a little brother FX4, the primary reason you would be looking at the FX2 is that the width, including this pump, just doesn't fit in your cabinetry and you're trying to hide it. So maybe you would want a smaller bodied filter like this guy, and it has a much smaller pump that doesn't extrude quite as far from the body like the FX6 here does. I mean, you can see how far this thing comes out. It's several inches. I would guess about 4. I'll put a measurement down below. Versus the FX2 pump, you're probably shaving an extra inch off of that. It's probably only about 2.5 to 3 inches somewhere coming off the side of the body. So we've compacted a lot of things down to help it fit your cabinetry. Now, let me get these off the table. Let's compare the media trays and talk about how much media we can hold in these things. Now that we've got the trays out, this is where I think you're going to see the most obvious comparison size difference. Let me pull these inner trays out just so they don't fall out while I'm talking about them. But if we look at, here's our FX2 tray, right? It uses a slightly different foam. You'll notice here because the connection, right, with that extra distance in this tray size, and I mean, you can just, if I layer these two on top of each other, you can see that difference, right? Poking around that edge makes a lot obvious. If I line these up outside to outside, you can see this outside edge here and what we're looking at a difference when it comes to that width of the body between these units. And keep in mind that the FX4 uses the exact same trays as the FX2. And just to, we'll get this little extra piece of foam out of here, but just like the FX4 and FX6 use the same trays, not FX2. Sorry. Similar graded pattern design here, just like we have. It's the same basic engineering, but you'll see some small differences. So like an example here, where the inlet and outlet tubes go, there's a little piece of foam here, versus on the 2, it's completely cut out. So these are more whole, separate pieces of foam. From a personal, cleaning this concept, I actually kind of like this a little better, because these foams, when you are cleaning them, this little piece here feels like a potential point of where you could get some breakage. Just over time as you're using these, it might be a minor risk. I wouldn't worry about that too much. But just that's the major difference in the external tray. However, the nice part is these internal trays, and thus the internal diameter here, is exactly the same here. So if you are using these trays or not, they're the same size whether you're going from one or the other. That's handy, right? So when it comes to media capacity, you're going to end up with effectively the same media capacity in the central chamber. The only part that you're getting some change in is some of this, and you can even see this on camera, right? Let me bring it a little closer. You see the distance between the central tray and the foam. You've got these fins here. Where if you look at the FX2's trays, much tighter, right? So the fins aren't quite as large, and that's going to account for some semblance of water flow. But if we remember the way the water flows in these, water's going to come through the side here, up through the foam, over the top of the trays, and down before it exits the canister. So, as far as media capacity is concerned, same amount of media. Now, Fluval also sent me their new Bio FX media. I have a few bags of it. I bagged this individually in my own bags. You don't necessarily have to bag it, but here is roughly 1 liter worth of the 5 liters that comes in a box. And to give you an example of how that fits in these trays in a bag rather than, sitting flat, there you go. So you wouldn't be able to fit these internal trays on top of this if you're doing it the way I'm doing it. But if you were to get your media completely flat, you could hold about 1 liter, probably a little less, just because of how chunky this media is. And to give you some context, right? Here is a bag of Eheim Substrat Pro. So the little kind of gravel ball style stuff, right? And then if you compare that directly to the Bio FX, you can see just how much bigger and chunkier this media is. So the good news is, because it's big and chunky, you don't necessarily have to bag it. You could put it loose directly into the tray, and it's not going to fall through. Similar to what you would do with some of your larger, like ceramic bio rings, etc. Me personally, for maintenance, I like putting them in a bag. Now, when you do buy the Bio FX, it comes with this big boy. 1 giant bag, and this is designed to hold the entire 5 liters. Here is an example. And you might notice a little bit of like white stuff flaking off, or maybe you can kind of see it in here. So I rinsed this media, and you can see that kind of white buildup from these bags. And then after doing a pretty thorough rinse using my stainless steel strainer, I put them in the bags. I'd let them drip dry a bit before I moved them into the bags. And like I said, about 1 liter per each of these bags. And put it in a room with my dehumidifier to dry out some so that I could do this part of the presentation. I literally see dog hairs on this. Corgis, man. So what I would say is, seeing that compared to, say, this one here, which has gone through a second rinse, I would rinse this media super, super, super thoroughly, just because it is a little dusty. And any media like that, just make sure that you're not getting dust when you're setting up a brand new filter. You don't want to deal with that potentially getting in your water column and stuff like that. So any new media, even the Substrat Pro, right? I rinsed this stuff quite a lot too. And I had all sorts of like fine dust and particulates in my, down under my strainer and in the super fine part of my strainer. Just be safe with your media. But to kind of show the difference here, right? Because we know that these trays are roughly the same size of media capacity, we can put our Substrat Pro in one. And these bags are about the same size too. By the way, they're just different colors because they're different manufacturers. So with the Substrat Pro, this is less than 1 liter. Keep that in mind. Because it's a smaller media, right? If you look at that, it lays a little easier. And yes, this is less media by volume. I understand. But because it's a smaller media, it lays a little easier. Where this big chunky stuff, right, it doesn't lay down quite as much. But also, the super small media literally can fall through the holes in this stuff. So if you're using super fine media like this, bag it. Big media like this, if you don't care about using the internal trays, bag it. If you do want to use the internal trays, then maybe what you do is set up 1 tray with the internal tray with any of your extra foams, and you put that at top. And then in the very bottom one, you set your media. It's probably what I'm going to do with mine. Now, The FX6, because of the way it's designed, can hold a full 5 liters of the BioFX media. And if you account for the way the trays are set up and the 3 trays with the internal trays included, that basically tells you that each layer of this can hold roughly 1 liter of media. Or if you don't use the internal tray, you're probably fitting a little over 1.5 liters of media in here each time. I know, not American measurements, but it's okay. So basically what we're saying is the major difference between an FX2 and an FX6 when it comes to bio capacity is goose. Almost nothing as far as how much media you can fit in them. There is a little bit of difference in the amount of sponge, but you're really not losing that much. And if you wanted to do this with only the sponges, you can easily buy these inserts and then use the same trays like you would from an FX4 or FX6. These are readily available. Fill the whole thing with sponge and not worry about some kind of ceramic media like this. But if you're going for a higher bio capacity and you want to have this nice ceramic media, or whether it's your BioHome Ultimate, my personal favorite, Brightwater S, whatever it may be of the stuff I've tested so far, keep that in mind. I'm going to be testing this BioFX to see how I like it. Then you can fit it in depending on how much media capacity you care about. If you care less about sponge media and more about this, don't worry about these central trays and just jam these full. Get as much media in here as you can. Let's see here. For an experiment. Okay, so I've got 2 bags right now. I'm just going to see if I monkey with this media enough. Keep in mind, this is basically 2 liters. If I can get it to lay down. There you go. So we can't quite fit 2 liters. But I would say, if you were buying a box of the BioFX, and you got yourself some, if you want to use bags to make it easier, fill these a little more lightly so you can arrange them and stack them in the trays. Don't fill them quite as gingerly as I did. I did this for ease of volume as opposed to ease of fitting in the filter. And then you'll be able to fill this whole thing up. Or if you have a slightly larger bag and you fill it lightly, you can fill the bottom, put a tray over the top, and keep using this extra sponge. Me personally, what I would do is very similar to how my FX tray was set up. Sponge in the bottom, tray of sponge on top. You could probably even fit the very thin fine filtration pads that the FX6s and FX4s come with in the very bottom, down at the very bottom, if you wanted to. Have this as your top tray, and then underneath have a tray with about 1.5 liters or so of this media, and that would give you some really nice bio capacity with a lot of mechanical filtration to filter out your particulates. So, overall, what's our lesson here? The FX4 versus the FX2 is their primary case. Now, we've been using an FX6, right? Because Bentley has FX6s. He doesn't have an FX4. But the main difference is just this. Through some engineering on the internals and a slightly smaller pump, we can still fit the same amount of media in the center part of this tray, regardless of which version you are using per tray. The major differences are that the FX2, as we can see in this tray comparison size here, right, is a little more narrow by a little over 2 inches, about 2.3 inches, and that's saving some space. Also, because the pump is not quite as large, it's not coming out from the body quite as far. However, one of the things that we do lose with the FX2 is that drain valve in the bottom, which I know is kind of important to a lot of people. So, if you are really set on having an FX style filter, but you can't fit an FX4 or an FX6, then this might be your option. Measure first, right? Keep those body measurements in mind, but saving that extra 2.5 or so, close to 2.5 inches, might be just the right amount to make sure that it fits cleanly in your cabinetry and you're not like really struggling to get things in and out. Is this change enough to be worth the difference of considering this as a completely new product in the FX series? I think that's 100% up to the people who this is really designed for, which is purely on the scale of saving space. But the real question becomes, is it worth it to go to our FX2, right? Our littlest brother here, versus using the 407 or 406, etc., right? And we'll have to use 407 as the closest comparison because it's the largest one. You don't have as much media capacity in the 407. But if we want a full comparison, like I said, leave a comment down below like, yeah, Bentley, you got to do it. I'll go out and pick one up, and we'll do a comparison side by side. So, with that comparison being said, let me answer this from my perspective. Where I think the benefit is only if height is not your major constraint, but you have decent room underneath your tank. So if you're doing something like a 75-gallon or any of those slightly bigger tanks before you're going real big, like 125s and big tanks, maybe this is kind of your stopgap if you really want like the Fluval FX style, the smart pump, because all of these pumps are the smart pump, the one that auto turns itself off and kind of degasses itself. It does that once every 24 hours. If that's a feature you care about, I personally love the FX pumps. I swear they're unkillable in some cases. They can just take so much abuse and keep on ticking. Versus any other filter, then the FX2 might be something you care about because that slightly smaller body will allow you to fit it more cleanly if you're trying to have a nice, clean cabinet look. And if you're struggling to fit the FX4 and FX6, that's where you might be steered okay. Keep in mind, this is just as tall as an FX4. So if height was your problem, the FX2 is not going to fix that for you. That's not what this is solving. This is coming in a little bit. We're slimming down some, but we're still kind of a tall filter. We still got some chunk on us, but we got a lot of bio capacity, and that's the thing that FXs handle very well. Good bio capacity, lots of built-in sponge, can take a lot of abuse, not as powerful a pump, kind of expected in a smaller body, but also you're losing that drain plug. But other than that, it's basically straight up just a little brother to the FX4. So that's a comparison, kind of a side-by-side looking at these things. Let me know what's the most interesting part to you. In the comments down below, like, is it, I can't believe that the internal tray is actually the same size and thus can fit the same amount of media. Or maybe it's like, man, I really prefer that bigger tray. It's just got a little bit more openness to help water pass by. There's some more worry that maybe stuff's going to clog up here if you don't maintain it fast enough compared to this guy, which allows a little more room for movement just to play it safe. Let me know in the comments down below where your concerns are. We'll be filling this guy up. If you guys vote on it, we'll get the 407 in here and do a comparison before I set this thing up. But we'll do a full setup once I get the new tank rip-roaring and ready to go. And we'll talk about how I'm setting it up. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, maybe share it out to some folks. It is still kind of hard to find the FX2. I haven't seen it on Amazon yet. I think part of it is just that with all the things going on in the world when it comes to shipping out product and stuff, I imagine whatever first wave they had probably sold out and they're just waiting for more to come in. So just be on the lookout. You probably see these soon if you want to get one of these. Fluval directly sells them on Amazon, so just keep that in mind. If you're not near a store that carries Fluval products, if you are near a store that carries Fluval products, they might be able to order one directly a little bit faster for you. So try talking to your local fish store and see if you can get one in stock. So with that being said, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.